The Pope is the Bishop of Rome and the leader of the worldwide Catholic Church. The primacy of the Roman bishop is largely derived from his role as the traditional successor to St. Peter, to whom Jesus is supposed to have given the keys of heaven and the powers of binding and loosing, naming him as the rock upon which the Church would be built. The current Pope is Francis, who was elected on the 13th of March 2013, succeeding Benedict XVI. The office of the Pope is the papacy. His ecclesiastical jurisdiction, the Diocese of Rome, is often called the Holy See or the Apostolic See, the latter name being based upon the belief that the Bishop of Rome is the successor of Peter the Apostle. The Pope is considered one of the world's most powerful people because of his diplomatic and cultural influence. He is also head of state of Vatican City, a sovereign city-state entirely enclaved within the Italian capital city of Rome. The papacy is one of the most enduring institutions in the world and has had a prominent part in world history. The popes in ancient times helped in the spread of Christianity and the resolution of various doctrinal disputes. In the Middle Ages, they played a role of secular importance in Western Europe, often acting as arbitrators between Christian monarchs. Currently, in addition to the expansion of the Christian faith and doctrine, the popes are involved in ecumenism and interfaith dialogue, charitable work, and the defense of human rights. Popes, who originally had no temporal powers, in some periods of history accrued wide powers similar to those of temporal rulers. In recent centuries, popes were gradually forced to give up temporal power, and papal authority is now once again almost exclusively restricted to matters of religion. Over the centuries, papal claims of spiritual authority have been ever more firmly expressed, culminating in 1870 with the proclamation of the dogma of papal infallibility for rare occasions when the Pope speaks ex cathedra, literally from the chair, to issue a formal definition of faith or morals. History, title and etymology. The word pope derives from Greek pi alpha sigma, meaning father. In the early centuries of Christianity, this title was applied, especially in the East, to all bishops and other senior clergy, and later became reserved in the West to the Bishop of Rome, a reservation made official only in the 11th century. The earliest record of the use of this title was in regard to the by then deceased Patriarch of Alexandria, Pope Heracles of Alexandria. The earliest recorded use of the title Pope in English dates to the mid-10th century, when it was used in reference to Pope Vitalian in an Old English translation of Bede's Historia Ecclesiastica Gentis Anglorum. Position within the Church. The Catholic Church teaches that the pastoral office, the office of shepherding the Church that was held by the Apostles, as a group or college with St. Peter at the head, is now held by the successors, the bishops, with the Bishop of Rome at the head. The Catholic Church teaches that Jesus personally appointed Peter as leader of the Church in its dogmatic constitution. Lumen Gentium makes a clear distinction between apostles and bishops, presenting the latter as the successors of the former, with the Pope as successor of Peter in that he is head of the bishops as Peter was head of the apostles. Some historians have argued that the notion that Peter was the first bishop of Rome and founded the episcopal see that can be traced back no earlier than the 3rd century. The writings of the Church Father Irenaeus, who wrote around AD 180, reflect a belief that Peter founded and organized the Church at Rome. Moreover, Irenaeus was not the first to write of Peter's presence in the early Roman Church. Clement of Rome wrote in a letter to the Corinthians, c. 96, about the persecution of Christians in Rome as the struggles in our time, and presented to the Corinthians its heroes. First, the greatest and most just columns, the good apostles, Peter and Paul. Saint Ignatius of Antioch wrote shortly after Clement, and in his letter from the city of Smyrna to the Romans he said he would not command them as Peter and Paul did. Given this and other evidence, many scholars agree that Peter was martyred in Rome under Nero, although some scholars argue that he may have been martyred in Palestine. Protestants contend that the New Testament offers no proof that Jesus established the papacy, nor even that he established Peter as the first bishop of Rome. Others, using Peter's own words, argue that Christ intended himself as the foundation of the Church and not Peter. Others have argued that the Church is indeed built upon Jesus and faith, but also on the disciples as the roots and foundations of the Church on the basis of Paul's teaching in Romans and Ephesians, though not primarily Peter. First-century Christian communities would have had a group of presbyter bishops functioning as leaders of their local churches. Gradually, episcopacies were established in metropolitan areas. Antioch may have developed such a structure before Rome. In Rome there were many who claimed to be the rightful bishop, though again Irenaeus stressed the validity of one line of bishops from the time of St. Peter up to his contemporary Pope Victor I and listed them. Some writers claim that the emergence of a single bishop in Rome probably did not occur until the middle of the 2nd century. In the view, Linus, Cletus and Clement were possibly prominent presbyter bishops but not necessarily monarchical bishops. Documents of the 1st century and early 2nd century indicate that the Holy See had some kind of preeminence and prominence in the Church as a whole, though the detail of what this meant is very unclear at this period. Early Christianity. It seems that at first the terms episcopo and presbyter were used interchangeably. The consensus among scholars has been that, at the turn of the 1st and 2nd centuries, local congregations were led by bishops and presbyters whose offices were overlapping or indistinguishable. Some say that there was probably no single monarchical bishop in Rome before the middle of the 2nd century. Unlikely later. Quote, other scholars and historians disagree, citing the historical records of St. Ignatius of Antioch and St. Irenaeus, who recorded the linear succession of bishops of Rome up until their own times. They also cite the importance accorded to the bishops of Rome in the ecumenical councils, including the early ones. In the early Christian era, Rome and a few other cities had claims on the leadership of worldwide church. James the Just, known as the brother of the Lord, served as head of the Jerusalem Church, which is still honored as the Mother Church in Orthodox tradition. Alexandria had been a center of Jewish learning and became a center of Christian learning. Rome had a large congregation early in the apostolic period whom Paul the Apostle addressed in his epistle to the Romans, and according to tradition Paul was martyred there. During the 1st century of the Church, the Roman capital became recognized as a Christian center of exceptional importance. Clement I, at the end of the 1st century, wrote an epistle to the Church in Corinth intervening in a major dispute, and apologizing for not having taken action earlier. However, there are only a few other references of that time to recognition of the authoritative primacy of the Roman See outside of Rome. In the Ravenna document of the 13th of October 2007, theologians chosen by the Roman Catholic and the Eastern Orthodox Churches stated, 41. Both sides agree that Rome, as the church that presides in love, according to the phrase of St. Ignatius of Antioch, occupied the first place in the taxis, and that the Bishop of Rome was therefore the protos among the patriarchs. They disagree, however, on the interpretation of the historical evidence from this era regarding the prerogatives of the Bishop of Rome as protos, a matter that was already understood in different ways in the first millennium. In the late 2nd century AD, there were more manifestations of Roman authority over other churches. In 189, assertion of the primacy of the Church of Rome may be indicated in Irenaeus's Against Heresies, with, because of its superior origin, all the churches must agree, and it is in her that the faithful everywhere have maintained the apostolic tradition. Quote, In AD 195, Pope Victor I, in what is seen as an exercise of Roman authority over other churches, excommunicated the Quartodecimans for observing Easter on the 14th of Nisan, the date of the Jewish Passover, a tradition handed down by John the Evangelist. Celebration of Easter on a Sunday, as insisted on by the Pope, is the system that has prevailed. Nicaea to East-West Schism. The Edict of Milan in 313 granted freedom to all religions in the Roman Empire, beginning the peace of the Church. In 325, the First Council of Nicaea condemned Arianism, declaring Trinitarianism dogmatic, and in its sixth canon recognized the special role of the sees of Rome, Alexandria, and Antioch. Great defenders of Trinitarian faith included the popes, especially Pope Liberius, who was exiled to Berea by Constantius II for his Trinitarian faith, Damasus I, and several other bishops. In 380, the Edict of Thessalonica declared Nicene Christianity to be the state religion of the empire, with the name Catholic Christians reserved for those who accepted that faith, while the civil power in the Eastern Roman Empire controlled the Church, and the ecumenical Patriarch of Constantinople, the capital, wielded much power in the Western Roman Empire. The bishops of Rome were able to consolidate the influence and power they already possessed. After the fall of the Western Roman Empire, barbarian tribes were converted to Arian Christianity or Catholicism. Clovis I, king of the Franks, was the first important barbarian ruler to convert to Catholicism rather than Arianism, allying himself with the papacy. Other tribes, such as the Visigoths, later abandoned Arianism in favor of Catholicism. Middle Ages. After the fall of the Western Roman Empire, the Pope served as a source of authority and continuity. Pope Gregory I administered the Church with strict reform. From an ancient senatorial family, Gregory worked with the stern judgment and discipline typical of ancient Roman rule. Theologically, he represents the shift from the classical to the medieval outlook. His popular writings are full of dramatic miracles, potent relics, demons, angels, ghosts, and the approaching end of the world. Gregory's successes were largely dominated by the Exarch of Ravenna, the Byzantine emperor's representative in the Italian peninsula. These humiliations, the weakening of the Byzantine Empire in the face of the Muslim conquests, and the inability of the emperor to protect the papal estates against the Lombards, made Pope Stephen II turn from Emperor Constantine V. He appealed to the Franks to protect his lands. Pepin the Short subdued the Lombards and donated Italian land to the papacy. When Pope Leo III crowned Charlemagne as Roman emperor, he established the precedent that, in Western Europe, no man would be emperor without being crowned by a pope. The low point of the papacy was 867-1049. This period includes the Saeculum Obscurum, the Crescenti era, and the Tusculan papacy. The papacy came under the control of vying political factions. Popes were variously imprisoned, starved, killed, and deposed by force. The family of a certain papal official made and unmade popes for 50 years. The official's great-grandson, Pope John XII, held orgies of debauchery in the Lateran Palace. Otto I, Holy Roman Emperor, had John accused in an ecclesiastical court, which deposed him and elected a layman as Pope Leo VIII. John mutilated the imperial representatives in Rome and had himself reinstated as pope. Conflict between the emperor and the papacy continued, and eventually dukes in league with the emperor were buying bishops and popes almost openly. In 1049, Leo IX became pope, at last a pope with the character to face the papacy's problems. He traveled to the major cities of Europe to deal with the Church's moral problems firsthand, notably simony and clerical marriage and concubinage. With his long journey, he restored the prestige of the papacy in northern Europe. For the 7th century it became common for European monarchies and nobility to found churches and perform investiture, a deposition of clergy in the states and fiefdoms, the personal interests causing corruption among the clergy. This practice had become common because often the prelates and secular rulers were also participants in public life. To combat this and other practices that had corrupted the Church between the years 900 and 1050, centers emerged promoting ecclesiastical reform, the most important being the Abbey of Cluny, which spread its ideals throughout Europe. This reform movement gained strength with the election of Pope Gregory VII in 1073, who adopted a series of measures in the movement known as the Gregorian Reform, in order to fight strongly against simony and the abuse of civil power and try to restore ecclesiastical discipline, including clerical celibacy. The conflict between popes and secular autocratic rulers such as the Holy Roman Emperor Henry IV and Henry I of England, known as the Investiture Controversy, was only resolved in 1122 by the Concordat of Worms, in which Pope Calixtus II decreed that clerics were to be invested by clerical leaders, and temporal rulers by lay investiture. Soon after, Pope Alexander III began reforms that would lead to the establishment of canon law. Since the beginning of the 7th century, the Caliphate had conquered much of the southern Mediterranean, and represented a threat to Christianity. In 1095, the Byzantine Emperor Alexios I Komnenos asked for military aid from Pope Urban II in the ongoing Byzantine Seljuk Wars. Urban, at the Council of Clermont, called the First Crusade to assist the Byzantine Empire to regain the old Christian territories, especially Jerusalem. East-West Schism to Reformation. With the East-West Schism, the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Roman Catholic Church split definitively in 1054. This fracture was caused more by political events than by slight divergences of creed. Popes had galled the Byzantine emperors by siding with the king of the Franks, crowning a rival Roman emperor, appropriating the Exarchate of Ravenna, and driving into Greek Italy. In the Middle Ages, popes struggled with monarchs over power. From 1309 to 1377, the pope resided not in Rome but in Avignon. The Avignon papacy was notorious for greed and corruption. During this period, the pope was effectively an ally of the Kingdom of France, alienating France's enemies, such as the Kingdom of England. The pope was understood to have the power to draw on the treasury of merit built up by the saints and by Christ, so that he could grant indulgences, reducing one's time in purgatory. The concept that a monetary fine, a donation accompanied contrition, confession, and prayer eventually gave way to the common assumption that indulgences depended on a simple monetary contribution. The popes condemned misunderstandings and abuses but were too pressed for income to exercise effective control over indulgences. Popes also contended with the cardinals, who sometimes attempted to assert the authority of Catholic ecumenical councils over the popes. Conciliarism holds that the supreme authority of the Church lies with a general council, not with the Pope. Its foundations were laid early in the 13th century, and it culminated in the 15th century. The failure of conciliarism to gain broad acceptance after the 15th century is taken as a factor in the Protestant Reformation. Various anti-popes challenged papal authority, especially during the Western Schism. In this schism, the papacy had returned to Rome from Avignon, but an anti-pope was installed in Avignon, as if to extend the papacy there. The Eastern Church continued to decline with the Eastern Roman Empire, undercutting Constantinople's claim to equality with Rome. Twice an Eastern emperor tried to force the Eastern Church to reunify with the West. first in the Second Council of Lyon and secondly in the Council of Florence. Papal claims of superiority were a sticking point in reunification, which failed in any event. In the 15th century, the Ottoman Empire captured Constantinople. Reformation to present Protestant reformers criticized the papacy as corrupt and characterized the Pope as the Antichrist. Popes instituted a Catholic Reformation, which addressed the challenges of the Protestant Reformation and instituted internal reforms. Pope Paul III initiated the Council of Trent, whose definitions of doctrine and whose reforms sealed the triumph of the papacy over elements in the Church that sought conciliation with Protestants and opposed papal claims. Gradually forced to give up secular power, the popes focused on spiritual issues. In 1870, the First Vatican Council proclaimed the dogma of papal infallibility for those rare occasions the Pope speaks ex cathedra when issuing a solemn definition of faith or morals. Later the same year, Victor Emmanuel II of Italy seized Rome from the Pope's control and substantially completed the Italian unification. In 1929, the Lateran Treaty between the Kingdom of Italy and the Holy See established Vatican City as an independent city-state, guaranteeing papal independence from secular rule. In 1950, Pope Pius XII defined the Assumption of Mary as dogma, the only time that a pope has spoken ex cathedra since papal infallibility was explicitly declared. The Petrine doctrine is still controversial as an issue of doctrine that continues to divide the Eastern and Western churches and separate Protestants from Rome, St. Peter and the origin of the papal office. The Catholic Church teaches that, within the Christian community, the bishops as a body have succeeded to the body of the apostles and the Bishop of Rome has succeeded to St. Peter. Scriptural texts proposed in support of Peter's special position in relation to the Church include Matthew chapter 16, I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Luke chapter 22, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan demanded to have you, that he might sift you like wheat. But I have prayed for you that your faith may not fail. And when you have turned again, strengthen your brothers. John chapter 21, feed my sheep. The symbolic keys in the papal coats of arms are a reference to the phrase, the keys of the kingdom of heaven, in the first of these texts. Some Protestant writers have maintained that the rock that Jesus speaks of in this text is Jesus himself or the faith expressed by Peter. This idea is undermined by the biblical usage of Cephas, which is the masculine form of rock in Aramaic to describe Peter. The Encyclopedia Britannica comments that the consensus of the great majority of scholars today is that the most obvious and traditional understanding should be construed, namely, that rock refers to the person of Peter.